going to install the fins, and we do this one at a time. Make sure that you haven't got any sanding sealer on here. If you do, just sand it down again. And then what I'm going to do here is a little bit different from the instructions, but if you've seen my other videos, you'll have seen this before. So I'm going to run a bead of glue here, fairly thin. And then I'm going to place this against the tube along one of my fin lines there. And now I'm going to pull that back off, wait for 30 to 60 seconds for it to become tacky, and then come back and put it back on again. And this just helps the fin stay in place. If you try and glue it on directly while it's wet and then let go of it, there's a good chance that the fin will come undone. Alright, so our 30 seconds has passed here, and I'm going to go ahead and put this back on. And now it's a little grabbier. And then check the alignment. Make sure it's straight up. And then also check the alignment with the line itself so that it is parallel to the body tube. And you may want to go ahead and put some pressure on this for a little bit. And you notice that here it looks like there's not much glue there. We'll fix that with fillets when we get to that stage. So go ahead and let this fin dry for at least 15 minutes, depending on your glue, and then do the same thing to the other fins. And I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do it off camera. My fins are drying. They're still just slightly wet, and I'm going to go ahead here. And our next job is to put on the launch lugs. And the first launch lug is going to go right at the aft end of the rocket. The second one has to go 7 inches up. So I'm just going to take my ruler here, find 7 inches. Alright, and indeed, there's the mark we made earlier when we roughened this up. Okay, so if you didn't do that earlier, now's the time to do it. And the launch lugs are going to go on pretty much the same way that the fins did, although you usually don't have to wait for them to get tacky since they're very lightweight and small. And so here, a little dab of glue on there. Okay, and that first one's going to go here. Now, some of you may be noticing that gap on that fin. We will fix that with fillets a little bit later here. Okay, so there's one launch lug. And quickly I'm going to put the other one on, and that way I can check to make sure both are in alignment while I can still move them easily. Okay, and so this one will go at my mark here. Okay, and now I can just sight down the tube and make sure that they are in line with my line and with each other, and those look just fine. Remove a little bit of glue there. Okay, and I'm going to return this to drying, and once the fins and the launch lugs are completely dry, we'll come back and put fillets on. Now, if you didn't use the Kevlar shock cord modification that I showed earlier, then you'll need to use the standard shock cord mount here. And so just cut this out from your instruction sheet, or again, you can make a copy of it. Once you have your shock cord mount cut out here. Then I just run a bead of glue here along the middle, and I'm going to spread that out. And now I'm going to place my shock cord here at just a little bit of an angle. And this is so it doesn't fold right up on top of itself. And then it's simply a matter of folding each number over the next. So the 1 goes over the 2, like that. And then the 2 goes over the 3, thusly. And go ahead and squeeze it around there. Okay, and then give this a bit of a curve. Now this final step I'm not going to show here simply because I did not want to use this. But if you're using this shock cord, then what you want to do now is put a thin film of glue over this whole thing. And then tuck this down into the body tube as far as you can make it go. It needs to be at least 1.5 inches in there so that it does not obstruct the nose cone, and then you'll press that up against the inside of the body tube. The farther you can get this thing down, the better. Next, we need to prepare the nose cone, and there are a few tasks to do here. One, if your nose cone has this little piece of flash in the eyelet there, carefully cut that out, but make sure you don't cut the eyelet itself. There we go, finally. That was a big piece of flash. Alright, and then just clean that out a little bit. Now, the kit comes with these 2 pieces of clay, and these are to add mass to the nose cone. Do not skip this step. If the nose does not have this extra weight in it, the rocket will fly unstably and could be a danger to you or those around you. So take these out, and probably you're going to need to open this part of the nose cone a little bit. And again, you can use your hobby knife for that. And here I'm just cutting at a bit of an angle and then kind of corkscrewing that in. Being careful not to have my fingers where when the knife slips like that I might get cut. So keep that knife aimed away. And also here, be careful that you don't cut the eyelet there that the shock cord attaches to. You want this about pencil sized, because that's often what I use to shove the clay down in with. You can also use the handle of your hobby knife if it's long enough. Okay, so that's wide enough for me. And now I'm going to cut this clay into smaller sections and just roll it out into a little worm shape. And then just drop that worm down inside. And repeat. And then for my final pushing here, I'm using a 1/4 inch dowel. My hobby knife wasn't getting down quite deep enough. There we go. Okay, now if you're going to use the paint scheme that's shown on the package, where it's got a black nose cone, you'll probably want to go ahead and paint the nose cone before you attach it to the rest of the rocket. And as part of that preparation, you'll want to get rid of this seam here. Okay, so there's a seam on both sides of the nose cone. And I'm going to use some 220 grit sandpaper here. You can even use finer if you want. But that will take down the seam. And then I'm also going to give a light sanding all the way around the nose, and that will help the paint to adhere better. Alright, now the tip of the nose cone can also be particularly difficult. So I try to just start at the tip and work away from it in short strokes. Okay, now if you still have kind of a valley in that seam and you don't like it there, you can fill this in with modeling putty, like this stuff here. And this is non-toxic. You can work it with your fingers. So I'm just going to put a little bead of this along that valley of a seam. And I'm just going to work it in here. And then what I'll do is, once this is dry, I'm going to sand most of it away. And if all goes as planned, it will just leave behind the small amount that's filling the seam. Okay, opposite side really doesn't need any. So I'm going to set this aside to dry, and then we'll come back to other parts of the rocket. So the rocket is ready for fin fillets now. And it's a good idea to have some tissue or some paper towels handy here. And what I'm going to do is just take my glue and run a bead in the corner here all along the length of the fin. And then take my finger and smooth that in. Okay, and the excess I can then use for the next fillet. Okay, and if you need to, you can add more to it. Okay, and go ahead and let that dry horizontally. So you'll want something to prop that up a little bit. There's an old engine. Okay, and the reason for that is if you let this dry on an angle or vertically, the glue will tend to run to one end or the other. So do one face at a time. And then once that has set up, you can turn and do the next face and so on until you've got the whole thing done. Do the same thing with the launch lugs, put little fillets on either side of those. And so I'll do the rest of the fillets off camera. The modeling putty has dried now, so I'm going to go ahead and sand this again. And the modeling putty will tend to clog up your sandpaper, so you might want to have extra handy. Alright, that about does it. And you'll notice you really can't see a lot of putty anymore, and that's because the only place it still remains is in that little groove. And now I'm just going to quickly finish doing the rest of the nose cone, give it a light sanding, and then I'll take this aside to paint it. My fillets have dried, and they look to be in pretty good shape there. If you prefer thicker fillets, you can add another layer onto this. And really the last thing we have to do here, other than finishing the rocket, is to attach the streamers here. There are 2 of them, and according to the instructions, these are just going to be tied on. And depending on which shock cord you used, the one that came with it, the rubber or the Kevlar, tying them on will work. And so here all they're showing is just to take your streamer and bring it down at least, that far, 6 inches, a little bit more from the nose cone. And they're simply tying this on. So if you were to gather up part of the streamer here and just tie a knot in. Now the streamer material is going to be considerably thicker than the shock cord. Okay, and then tie that down, and then put another knot in it. So they're having it double knotted directly onto the shock cord there, and you can do this with either type of shock cord. Okay, now I would prefer not to, as I don't want these big knots in there. So I'm going to take that back out. Personally, I prefer to tape my streamers on, and depending on the size of the streamer, the type of rocket, how fast it's going to be moving, things like that, the type of tape can vary. So for really lightweight rockets, I'll use masking tape and use a crepe paper streamer. For streamers like this, I found that either some vinyl tape and, for example, the Gorilla packing tape works really well, but it's kind of expensive. Electrical tape will work well. And for this rocket, I'm going to try some metal duct tape. Okay, so this is actually a very thin sheet of metal, but the adhesive on it is really good. And since it's nice and shiny, it should show up really well after ejection, as if you couldn't see the streamer already. Alright, but you may have to use your hobby knife to kind of tease up backing on this. Alright, and I'm just going to set aside that elastic one there. And so what I'm going to do here is, first of all, I'm just going to take my tape, and this is sticky side up, and I'm going to run this shock cord along its length down the middle. And I'm going to take my streamer, which is almost the same width. Alright, and they didn't cut this very straight. And you can either leave it like that or go ahead and square it off. I'm going to do the latter here. Okay, and now I can put this on one side like that. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and press that down really tightly, and then I'm just simply going to wrap the tape over. Now again, you don't need to do this with this metallized tape. I'm kind of doing this as an experiment. I haven't tried this before, but I have done this a lot with electrical tape, and you can do it the exact same way. Okay, so there's one of the streamers, and then the other one will go on just below it. So I'm I'm going to go ahead and square this one off again. Okay. And get another piece of my tape. Okay, another piece of tape. The paint on the body and the nose is complete, and so my last task here is to tie the shock cord to the nose cone. And even though I've got the Kevlar cord here, you would do the same thing if you're using the elastic. So just tie a double knot in this, cinch it down well, and pull from both ends to make sure it's good and locked into place there. If you are using the rubber shock cord, I recommend putting just a little dab of white glue or wood glue on the knot and working it in. Since I am using the Kevlar here, I'll do the same thing, but with a little bit of regular super glue here. Alright, that's not a little bit, that's a lot. Oop, a little bit pressurized there. Okay, so I'm just going to wipe off that excess there. Okay, and then in either case, we don't want this large amount of shock cord hanging out here where it might get up next to the shoulder and prevent this from ejecting properly. So here, I'm just going to cut off most of it, just like that. Okay, and this rocket is done. I'm not going to do the decals on the video. I will leave decals to your own artistic inclinations. But we've got it painted, it's structurally sound, and it's ready for a launch. So I hope you have a good launch, a safe recovery, and you'll see me in the next video.